Dangerously Close.
This episode was brought to you by William Mitchell Audio. Do you like adventure? Do you like excitement? Do you like joining the Illuminati? Well, all of those things are in this episode, and that would not have even been possible if I didn't have this microphone, which I wouldn't have if it wasn't for William Mitchell Audio. So I feel like the least we can do is go to WilliamMitchellAudio.com.
My guest today is Brandon Case. Brandon Case is an author, photographer, and adventurer. Last year, he hiked the 2,653-mile Pacific Crest Trail, walking the mountains from Mexico to Canada over the course of 6 months, facing deep snow, lightning storms, ash rain, and constant rebellion from his feet. His journey ran the gamut of experience from exploration and extreme athletics to death and TBI recovery. He has short fiction forthcoming in several markets and is currently reliving his PCT adventures on Instagram at Brandon Case 101. What's up, Brandon?
Hey, man.
So I might be jumping way ahead in the story here, but I kind of feel like I can't gloss over the part of your bio that said you had a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
And without asking, like, did that happen prior to the journey, or did that happen like out in the mountains?
Ironically, we're jumping to the beginning. So, so this that was part of the impetus for the journey. So I was in a really bad motorcycle accident maybe 3 years ago now, about 2 years before I started the trail. Back when I was actually working for the state of California doing IT work, and I rode a motorcycle around everywhere. I bought like the best motorcycle that I could, and then had no money for another vehicle, so it was like my only vehicle.
Yeah.
And so I was riding it through Sacramento traffic all the time. And one day I was on the way back home from work, and I was on a 3-lane road. There were 2 open lanes of traffic going about 45 miles an hour, and then a stopped left-hand turn lane. A woman came out of a shopping center, crossed both of the open lanes, and then tried to nose into the stop turn lane. Didn't see me at all. Plowed into her, did a full front flip, landed on the back of my head, and then kind of bounced down the road. And so that was the big TBI. It totally screwed everything up. I basically, from that point, sat in a room for about 2 years trying to let my brain knit back together, and had a bunch of issues, really, really bad headaches. I think I spent the first 3 months or so just out with 9 out of 10 pain every day. And
Holy shit.
Yeah, it was really bad. The kind where you're just you're trying to make it second to second, you're just trying to get time to continue ticking forward. And anyway, so it was pretty miserable. That stuff kind of started to get a little bit better. I had a bunch of other weird stuff. My autonomic nervous system was completely shot, and short-term memory, all kinds of that stuff. That'll pop back up on the trail stories intermittently through this whole thing. But yeah. And then,
did you have a helmet on, or did you just crack your bare head?
Dude, my brain would have been just smushed across the asphalt with a helmet. I had a really nice helmet. I always wore full gear, so I had leathers and a $700 helmet, and that was the only reason that I'm still here, I'm sure. But I actually landed on the back of my head, and it was intense. So
yeah, so listen up, kids, wear a helmet, because you can wear a $700 helmet and still get a serious traumatic brain injury if you crack your head hard enough.
Seriously. Yeah. And so you kind of go through this whole TBI process with the normal process. They give you about 1.5 years to be recovering. Then they're you're pretty much done. This is going to be you now. And I was still messed up. And so that was pretty hard. And like I said, I sat in that room for 2 years or so, probably. And eventually one of my friends took a road trip up to Oregon and took me with her. And so I stepped out into the forest for the first time in forever. And it felt like I could breathe again. And which was really kind of a powerful experience for me. I grew up doing a lot more outdoor stuff, running around, camping and all that. And then, Yeah, and so right around that same time, I saw something about the PCT. I think it was on YouTube or something, and the pieces just kind of started knitting together just immediately after that. I started doing a bunch of research, and then I read about some people that had brain injuries that went on the trail and saw some amount of like recovery even after that initial recovery window that they give you. And I was like, yeah, I'm doing this against all advice and the complete fear of like everybody that cared about me, who didn't want me to like wander off into the middle of the wilderness, with a head injury.
Yeah.
But yeah, 6 months after that, I was packed up and getting on the trail.
Well, hell yeah, man. So I guess what was the total time frame between motorcycle accident and hitting the trail?
Let's see, the accident was in January of 2018, and I was on the trail in March of 2020. So
Oh yeah, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad your brain is doing better, man.
Yeah, no, it was cool. It got quite a bit better. I was surprised. I was really worried about, the whole experience. I've always kind of jumped, into these kind of adventurous things anyway, but yeah, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it this time, and it worked out, and things got quite a bit better. My short-term memory was so bad when I was originally keeping my journals. I was on my phone doing everything, and so I couldn't remember the mileage between the screen on gut hooks that shows you where you are on the trail, and then switching over to the app, the notes app, and trying to put down the mileage. I could not remember the numbers between those. I'd have to go back and forth like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And then sometime around like the middle of the trail, those numbers and everything started actually like sticking in my head. And so there were a couple of things like that, but it was marked. And by the end of the trail, like I was doing a lot better than when I started, for sure. So
that's fucking awesome. And I had a second question that I had written down that I really feel like you kind of just covered so much of it when we were just talking about the motorcycle accident and like all the benefits that you got from the trail. But I still want to ask this question anyway, because I feel like there might be some more, maybe some deeper level stuff, or maybe some other things that you just left out for that. And do you mind if I just kind of maybe ask you to say almost the same thing again?
Okay.
But and honestly, if the answer is really just kind of what you just said, then like we could just skip ahead. But I do want to ask, because it's kind of a 2-part question, and one part is, I know you were saying like that you had been reading about the PCT and like also like some of the benefits people had seen out there, but obviously you have a choice where you're going to go, when you go wandering into the wilderness. And so I was wondering, why did you specifically choose the Pacific Crest Trail? And then the second part of that question is also the deeper level, which is more than just where you decided to go, but why did you decide to go on a journey like in the first place? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess we can start with the why, which for me, a lot of it had to do with the whole, trying to find some amount of recovery from the accident. But I also wanted to, like, I've kind of lived my life like a protagonist, like that. I grew up reading too many like adventure stories and stuff like that. So that's kind of always how I've lived my life. I love gathering stories. And so I just go do like wild stuff that, seems like fun. And that's been pretty much my entire adult life. But then for, a solid 2.5 years, all I had were tragic stories. And so like I had some pretty good tragic stories, but I was really tired of them being tragic. So it seemed like something I could do that would have like a really cool story, or a lot of really cool stories associated with it. And as for why the PCT, it was pretty convenient since I was living in California anyway. And I love the West Coast, like all those mountains and everything. I absolutely love Washington. I've lived in Washington before. And I was really tired of California at that point, because I was trapped in this little tiny room in the middle of Sacramento, which feels like nothing at all like the wilderness. And so hiking from out of California, and it's like 1,700 miles to get out of California and go towards Washington, which honestly feels more like home to me. It had a lot of good symbolic relevance for that whole deal.
Honestly, I couldn't think of a better reason to do it. I mean, because you really just spoke to me with that. 'Cause I do love to collect stories myself. It's something that it's not always my motivation for doing something, but oftentimes if I'm going to do something and it's going to be something gnarly, it's because I want to add a new story to my life, or for whatever reason, maybe because it's fun to tell that story to someone else, or because it's just fun to have that story for myself. Does that make sense?
Right. So, totally.
I think I totally get what you're saying with that. I guess also, I mean, we're doing a pretty good job of accidentally staying at the beginning of the story, even though I thought I might be jumping, because I had no idea how you got your injury. So I didn't know if that was if you'd been in an avalanche or something. But just kind of staying at the beginning, man. And so I don't know much about that trail. I haven't never been on Pacific Crest Trail, but I know that your journey went from Mexico to Canada.
Yeah.
Do you start above the U.S.-Mexico border, or do you go down into Mexico a little bit?
You start at the border, which kind of simplifies the whole, logistics a bit. But so, yeah, you start at the big new border wall, and then you just hike all the way up to Canada. Most of the time people go through into Canada. That wasn't really an option for my trip, which actually made it longer because I had to backtrack 30 miles to get to the nearest road in the US and then go back home. But that's a story in and of itself.
Yeah, that would be the last thing you want is at the very beginning of your hike, to have some border patrol agent being like, "What are you doing?" I'm going on an adventure.
Yeah.
They fucking understand that. What's an adventure?
Yeah.
And I guess you couldn't go into Canada, right? Because the border was closed to Americans, right?
Yeah.
Shit, man. So I guess we really did start at the beginning, but do you mind? Can we just for a little? Like you said, you like to do a lot of stuff, collect a lot of stories, do cool things. Before we go further onto this particular adventure in the story, I'd like to go back before the beginning and just see or just ask. I know this is kind of a tough question because it could be you might have multiple answers, but just anyone you pick is totally fine. I was just gonna see what would be your gnarliest adventure that you had been on prior to hiking from Mexico to Canada?
Oh, that is quite a question.
Or it could just be in your top 5 or your favorite or something. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Standalone.
It was interesting because most of my adventures haven't been of this particular vein. Not since I was a youth. I actually had never been backpacking before this whole thing. So this was, I just jumped in
oh, crazy. Hell yeah, man.
Yeah. So no, kind of, there was just a hodgepodge. I moved around the US a lot after I got, free of growing up. And I just chose to live in all the various destinations that people go to visit. I figured those were probably the good places to go stay at. So Southwest Florida and Washington. I spent a bunch of time in Southwest Florida doing treasure hunting, metal detecting.
Sick, dude. Going out on boats and diving for treasure.
I was never legit enough to have a big boat. I bought a underwater metal detector, and so I had snorkeling stuff and everything, but so I could just go down and sift through the sand, all throughout Southwest Florida. Most of the time I was probably about chest deep, maybe up to my neck. The way that gold kind of falls into the ocean, it'll fall into these troughs in the sand because you have the waves are, creating this bed, and then it drags the gold back down. So you have these higher density bars of gold. Anyway, there are a couple of them. Some of them are about knee deep. Some of them are about chest deep. And so I'd be down there sweeping, and mostly you get jewelry from people that are around, but sometimes you get really cool old stuff too. I have a whole box full of old random gold stuff that I found in the in the ocean in Florida. So
anything kind of like a doubloon, like a gold doubloon.
I never found a doubloon. Doubloons are awesome. No, I found a lot of I found some pretty cool old pendants that were 10 karat gold or something like that. And then, like I said, a ton of rings, a suspicious amount of diamonds and rubies and stuff like that, just in these, nicer gold rings. But those are all pretty contemporary. But it was totally wild. There's nothing scooping your shovel down and then pulling up a chunk of gold. It was amazing.
Yeah. Oh my God, dude. I think I want to change what I do right now. I want to go treasure hunt, man.
Yeah.
Oh shit! What part of Florida was that? Like,
I lived in Naples, and so that's at the very southern tip. It's basically across the peninsula from Miami. And so I kind of wandered all around through there. Marco Island was really good. That was a little bit south of us. So I did that whole thing, and then I connected with a bunch of kind of old school treasure hunting like guys, and then they had like the most random spots. Like one of them had keys to all the school districts, all of the playgrounds and their grounds and stuff, and then the school districts would have him come in and sweep the area, because when you're metal detecting, like you're removing a bunch of like random jagged sharp metal from the beaches, which is actually probably my favorite part of doing that. Like sometimes you go home with a piece of gold, but you'd always go home with like a freaking bag full of like twisted gnarly metal that like wasn't going to be cutting people up on the beach anymore.
yeah,
Anyway, I've always been into environmental stuff and stuff, so that was always really fun. But he would go and sweep the schools, and you would find a suspicious amount of like awesome stuff in school playgrounds and stuff while you're cleaning it for all the people. And so anyway, there were tons of weird spots like that.
Man, I don't know why this makes me think. I knew this guy. I was just thinking about sharks and just being chest deep out there in the water, like that's because that's where they get you. But I knew a guy that he was fishing on a sandbar, so he was only like maybe like stomach deep, something like that. But a shark did just come up and just took his leg right off at the hip. He lived, but it's a crazy story too, because he was with his brother, and his brother his first instinct was to try and get the leg back. I don't know why that was, and he got the leg, so he went after the shark. The story is that he was like punching the shark, got the leg out of its mouth, grabbed the leg and his brother, and swam them both back to shore. But the dude's doing fine, honestly. And he's got such a great prosthetic. If he's wearing jeans, you can't tell he's missing a leg. He has no limp or anything. It's crazy what they can do these days. But sorry to go off on sharks, man. Anytime I talk about this kind of like anything with like surfing or just, like what you're talking about, like chest deep in the water, surveying for gold, I just think about sharks. It's like my most irrational fear.
You tighten up every time you see a fin, I'll tell you. And most of the time it's a dolphin, but there's a ton of sharks out there. People get really freaked out about sharks. The actual statistics behind shark attacks are extraordinarily small. Like you're more likely to win the lottery just with the sheer number of people that are out on the beaches. But that doesn't really like calm the fears when you're out in the water. And you'd get dolphins that would hunt the beaches like constantly, and they'd come in these pods or whatever, and like drive all these fish up into the beach, and then have this big dolphin feeding frenzy on the fish. But when they're doing that, they're up near the surface, and so all you see is the fin coming towards you, and that puckered me up every single time that I saw it.
That dorsal fin, like, man, there's no way you can tell it's a dolphin from like, unless the dolphin starts jumping out of the water or whatever.
Yeah,
man. I know a dude that got bit by a dolphin as well. Actually, it wasn't a big. It was he worked with dolphins. He got bit like wrangling a dolphin, and it wasn't that bad. But I mean, it was pretty gnarly. I guess a dolphin, like, they just choose not to like attack humans, but they could mess us up.
Yeah,
I think, and I would say for myself personally, I blame it all. I don't want to just throw this all in Steven Spielberg's lap. Or whatever, but I think it's because I watched Jaws just a little too young to like get the nuance from it, and just imprinted in my mind that sharks are terrifying and that they're out to get me.
Yeah,
like the last time I was surfing, it's like it's weird because when you are surfing, like when you're catching a wave, that's all you think. You're just having, like, you don't think about anything scary. It's just because you're just having so much fun. But the last place I was surfing, like I had to be like in the channel. It's like where you waited for your turn. And you could be out there for a while. Like you could have to wait, 30 minutes before you got a chance to catch a wave. And that's the deepest part. So that's where the sharks are. And so I'd be sitting there just watching people, waiting for my chance to get in there and paddle into a wave. And I'd start thinking, I'd be like, man, the water beneath me is so deep. Like, and there are great whites, like where I was at. So I don't know. We got off the subject a little bit, man.
Hold up. It's time for another My Views Are My Own astrological reading. This week's horoscope is for Leo. Hello, Leo. as metamorphic Pluto concludes retrograde in your 6th house of work and service and health and organization, you will begin to hear a raging, intermittent gust of a terrible Antarctic wind, whose cadences will sometimes hold vague suggestions of a wild and half-sentient musical piping, with notes extending over a wide range, and which, for some subconscious mnemonic reason, you will find disquieting and even dimly terrible. That's right, Leo. It's time to eliminate all the things from your life that don't feel high priority and replace them with things that do. For the old ones have been disturbed from their ancient slumber, and the mountains of madness call all Leos to their desolate summits. Remember, Leo, you can't put a price tag on your peace of mind, so fill your schedule with activities that bring happiness and connect with your heart. And beware prying too deeply beneath the surface of that ultimate waste of forbidden secrets as foretold in the ancient unreadable text of the Elder Horrors. The new moon heralds that Libra will command your house of community. This will be a great time for a party or social gathering, but remember, being non-pairing and semi-vegetable in structure, the old ones had no biological basis for the family phase of mammal life. I hope this has been helpful, Leo. And now back to the interview.
I wanted to, because this honestly, this does kind of. I'm gonna skip the next thing I was gonna say because this segues so well into another question I had for you, and that is because I know you did so much of this journey solo.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask, like, and this is just kind of like how you would categorize yourself, right? Like, would you categorize yourself as a person that just isn't scared of a lot of shit just in general? Or are you more of a master your own fears kind of dude? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. I think definitely the second half. I mean, there's definitely a lot that scares me. Just like anybody, I think you'd have to be pretty inhuman not to be, a bit frightened heading into some crazy, gnarly, unknown stuff. And especially once you get a taste of it, which was kind of part of the whole thing for me with the trail. I spent about 90% of it alone, and which was partly a matter of convenience and partly because I didn't have anybody that I could like really go with. Like none of my friends are crazy adventurers or anything like that. It'd been kind of nice to, if I do this whole thing again, like if I do the Continental Divide Trail or something like that, it'd be really cool to like bring a buddy that you're actually like tied with like through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people that do that, and it's kind of more of an interesting experience. For this personal journey, I just was going no matter what, and doing it solo was probably more introspective and better, and let me keep my own pace and all of that. But yeah, it was terrifying at various points, and I was just more determined than terrified, which is how I kind of process most adventure. And then afterward, you don't remember that terror like very much. Like it's a fun part of the story, like a little bit of spice to it, but by and large, you remember the high points. So
yeah, absolutely. I have to like agree with you. Like I fall into the same category as like, because I know people that like they really do seem to just have like not like much fear, like whatever. There's something about them where fear is not like like an important like element of them, so they like, or for whatever reason, or maybe it's just the specific things that I've seen them do. But like I have to do the same like master your fears thing, which is so much more difficult. But maybe in a way that might be more rewarding. Like having
it's more dimension to the experience. Like if you're not afraid when you're like going into the mountains alone, you either don't know shit about the mountains or like you are a little bit different. And then I know that I jumped ahead on that because I want to go back to, because we were talking like to the very beginning again. We were kind of got off on a little bit of track about like mastering fear and doing this solo, which is like the scariest way to do it. But just talking about like in the very beginning, so like when you were first down in, like at the border with Mexico, like the first couple of weeks, was that kind of like an adjustment phase for you? Like was there like a whole like I'm not in Sacramento, I'm on this trail and this is where I live now essentially. Was there like kind of like a thing where you're in your mind you were like clicking into this like day by day, or does that make sense? Yeah, no, it does, and from a couple of different angles. It, like I said, I'd never been backpacking before. I was also entirely deconditioned, so I was like, because I went from not doing anything. I was like almost completely sedentary, and then I was like, I'm gonna go walk from Mexico to Canada, and so I had to start out really slow. Like I was doing like I think I did 5 miles my first day. And then, I was averaging about 10 for a while and then kind of stepped it up to 12, 15, 20, and then beyond. But so there was a big physical transition and I really couldn't push myself beyond that. I needed to spend a lot of time recovering. One of the weird brain things that was very impactful for me was that um, I my brain wouldn't, my autonomic nervous system wasn't telling my body to do the normal things like when you stand up, all the capillaries in your legs, all the blood vessels will restrict, and then that drives blood up to your brain when you're standing in order to combat gravity. And mine just wouldn't do that. And so I'd go from a resting heart rate when I was laying down at about like 53, stand up, my heart rate would go to 120 or 130, just as my heart was like beating super hard to try to drive that blood up. I wouldn't breathe if I wasn't thinking about it. So like if I stopped thinking about breathing, my breaths would kind of cascade down until I would notice that I wasn't breathing, and then I would like resume breathing, which was really problematic at night because you're not conscious. And like I did a sleep study, and I would stop breathing like 13 times a night, or 13 times an hour. Yeah. Sorry. So every hour, 13 times I would stop breathing. So it was sleep apnea, but not obstructive. Like I didn't snore. A lot of usually your people that have sleep apnea tend to be a little bit overweight. Like you have you just have a hard time getting air past like a physical blockage. But my brain was just like, let's not tell him to keep breathing when he's not thinking about it. So then I just gasped and wake up. So I was constantly fatigued, had none of that stuff. And so especially in the beginning, like I needed to spend like 12 hours per night in my tent, just like laying down, trying to recover for the next day. And anytime that I linked up with a group or something, I wouldn't be doing that anymore. It'd be cut down because I'd be socializing and like trying to like do the group thing. And then I'd only spend like 8 hours a night, and then I'd start just plowing into the ground as far as like getting exhausted. And so so that was like the physical part. That was all freaking crazy. And then from the psychological, like where I live part, that was also like I moved out in order to be able to afford the trail. I moved out of the house that I'd been living in. I stored all of my stuff at my family's. I spent my next 6 months forward. All of that money I spent on gear, and so I was on the trail. Like I had nowhere to go back to, which kind of interplayed with the whole COVID thing because that blew up maybe like 3 weeks or something, 2 or 3 weeks after I got on trail, and so. I remember I was in the middle of the mountains and I came back down to where there was service, and my phone just like blew up with text messages where people were like, the world is basically ending right now.
Oh yeah, dude. So yeah. That's crazy. So you were like out of touch when
I was like
when it all pops off because yeah, because you said you started in like April of 2020,
March
right?
10th. March 10th.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's insane, man.
It was crazy. It was like I came back and like society was melting. but
hey, man, like what a safe place to be, man. Up in the mountains by yourself.
Seriously, yeah.
Especially when they were like, there was like, there's like pretty much like no way you could have gotten sick. I mean, except I guess you said you occasionally were with other groups, but still, those would have been isolated people as well. It's not like you were going to like Six Flags.
No. Ironically, I think I had like the least contact with people throughout that entire period. And which got really bizarre because the PCTA, which is the administration that kind of governs the trail, they don't have any actual power. They're like a nonprofit that like organizes the trail. The trail actually belongs to the U.S. Forest Service, and so they told everybody to get off the trail. They're like, you guys need to go home. That's our official stance in California. Like, get off of the trail. And I was like super committed to this whole experience from.
You're like, this is my home.
Yeah, this is my home. No, like literally, like there are provisos in all of the mandates for staying shelter in place that reference being homeless, and I was actually very homeless. The trail was my home for that whole period. anyway, and the U.S. Forest Service kept the trail open that entire period. So I was on the trail. I was like, I was super careful when I went into towns. Like I wore a mask. All I did was go into the post office, picks up a box that had all my food in it, and then leave the town. Anytime that I did spend money in town, they were like super thankful because all of the tourism and stuff that these little towns rely on had completely evaporated for that entire summer.
Oh yeah, because I bet like some people like that might have had like were planning on going and hiking like maybe some section of that trail were like, oh no, I'm just gonna stay home and do nothing or whatever.
Yeah, well, and online it was super toxic. Everybody was like, you need to stay home and all of this stuff. And so I disconnected from the internet. Like before that, I had been participating on like Reddit and Facebook and stuff like that. I didn't start posting my whole thing on Instagram until earlier this year after my asthma of hate had like dissipated off of the internet for a little while. But yeah, it was crazy. But so many people, like I'd say there were like a handful of us on the trail for this whole thing. Usually there are like thousands of people hiking the PCT, but the entire time that I was in Yosemite, there was literally no one else there. It was like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Like it was crazy looking. All the buildings.
That is awesome. You got to feel like you were the only man on earth for a while, right?
Literally, like it was a once in a lifetime experience. Honestly, it was crazy. It was and the wilderness experience that I wanted because I was that was the only thing I was worried about, or well, it was one of the main things I was worried about on the trail was having it be too incredibly packed with people, having to like run and compete to try to get campsites and stuff, which you hear about in like normal years. And it wasn't that. Like there was just nobody out there. And I went really early. So I think through all of like the Sierra, all of that stuff, like it was completely snowed in. I think usually there were about 5 people that were ahead of me on the trail, and then that was it. And we were all spread out by like miles and miles. So you were literally alone for, I think I was alone for 7 days was the longest where I didn't see another human being, just like out wandering in the middle of the in the wilderness.
That's sick, man. So I've never gotten to make it 7 days without seeing another human being, but I was solo camping once. I was on an island, and it was like it's not like there's nothing on it. There's no houses or businesses or anything. It's just a piece, it's just a little piece of land. So if you go camp there, you're basically the only, and I wasn't the only person on the island, but as far as like it mattered, like I wasn't like the section that I had chose and the beach where I was at, there's no other people. And I totally like that. What you're saying, like I totally get that, like that cool ass feeling where I was like, dude, I'm the only dude in the world, like but I started doing like weird stuff. Like I was like doing like kung fu by myself in the woods and shit. It was, but it's just fun, man. I was just like, it was more of a Tai Chi kind of thing. Just, like,
yeah,
just kind of getting the motions in. I don't want to like circle it back to like, we were just talking about like mastering your fears, all that stuff, but that there was no way I was going to be able to go through this interview without asking this question, man, which is basically, and I'm sure there might have been more than one moment that was like maybe a little spooky or scary, but I was going to say like once again, I know this is a difficult to narrow it down because there's got to be more than one instance, but what is like the scariest like moment that happened on the trail?
Sure. I'll give you 2 that are a little bit different. So one that was like really scary, and this was probably mile like 500 or so, where I was still getting used to being around like crazy wildlife. That's a section that is really known for mountain lions. And so I was like keyed up about mountain lions for a while there. Bears generally run away from you. Mountain lions will also run away from you, but they also do sometimes eat people. And so you're hiking all these like really kind of barren mountains throughout that section where you're up on these big ridge lines, and everyone. And then there was this one night where I had slept. I slept during the middle of the day or whatever. Took like a nice siesta, like underneath a tree next to a little babbling creek. It was amazing. Hike up into these mountains, and it's later. I spent later resting than I wanted to, so I wanted to get more miles in. So I'm hiking into dusk, and that's the time when the cats are like the most active. And so, and I can all of my the hairs on my head or all over my body were standing on end. I was seeing big mountain lion tracks crossing the trail. Like there were signs of them everywhere. Anyway, I stopped and camped And it was a beautiful evening. I was set up in my little tent. I ate a ton of dried meat, like I was just getting my protein in or whatever. And I was laying there eating it. I had an audiobook on. I was just kind of like minding my own business, wasn't paying attention, and then like something inside of me just like clicked onto red alert, and I was like, something is wrong. And I was looking around, and I couldn't figure it out. But before, I had been listening to, it was like bird sounds, insects, dead quiet. It just all went like completely silent, and I was like, what? Something is wrong. And then I hear these footsteps, just like heavy, like a big animal, but quicker than like a human. And they come up and they go all the way around my tent, and they circle my tent like several times.
Holy shit, dude! So
yeah.
so they like hunt in packs like wolves? Dude?
No, I'm pretty sure it was just one, but
just one gnarly. Okay.
Yeah, just one like gnarly fucking lion that came out, smelled the meat, circled my tent like several times, and I'm sitting there I had like a pocket knife or whatever. I was just like sitting there with my pocket knife, like, holy shit. And then he left. They don't often try to get into tents, which I read about immediately after that.
Yeah.
As I was frantically Googling, will a mountain lion attack a tent? And and then he wandered off. But that like set my hair on end. I had a couple of interesting wildlife experiences like that, but that one, especially because it was so early in the trail and I was still pretty freaked out about everything, that one really kind of got me. And then I had another moment when I was in the High Sierra. I think it was on the backside of on the backside of one of the smaller passes, like Sulphur or something. So you do these big pass ascents, like usually really early in the morning, and you have to come down the other side. And hiking in the Sierra, it's all about timing, because you're trying to walk on top of the snow before it starts to melt, because post holing is the worst thing in the world. Like, it is just awful. And so you have to get the pass over like as early as possible. When we did like the biggest passes, like Forester, it's like 3:00 in the morning, you're out of the tent, you're walking. Because by the time it gets to be like 9 or 10, then you start falling through the snow and it just obliterates your legs. Like, it's just horrible. And so anyway, and I was with a little group at this point. I can tell you why in a little bit, but I chose to go with the group for the highest mountains because they're the most dangerous and everything else. And anyway, I was trying to come down the backside of this pass before it got too murderously post-holy, but I was already breaking through the snow. And I knew the trail was right down in front of me, and so I kind of.
How deep does your like when you're post holing? How deep does your leg fall into the snow?
It depends on where you are. Like I was in. There were a couple of different things. Like I think the deepest I fell into snow was probably about chest high. Holy
shit, that's like terrifying, dude. Like that alone is
dude. Okay, brief segue, but going up Donahue, that was my worst climb. It was just miserable, awful, and the snow was like really awful. It had rained the previous night, and it was warm, and I kept falling through the snow. And then that trek going up, I would fall through the crust, and you never know when you're going to fall. That's like the most terrifying, like traumatic part of this, is you can never tell which step is going to give way. Anyway, but going up Donahue, I fell not only through the snow crust, but into water beneath. Like, I would fall into streams through the snow, and I couldn't tell that I was going to fall or that there was a stream there. So I just suddenly be up to my waist in water, and like it was awful, because there are these huge streams that go through there too that you can hear like thrumming the snowpack, and those ones are deep, and you fall in that, it carries you under the ice. You're done. And so falling through the snow crust into water multiple times, I was just like, yeah, I'm done. I'm going to go under the ice, and it's awful. But then you kind of like, it's kind of like floundering in the shallow end of a pool. And then you're like, oh wait, I can stand up. And so, I never really went in to those below maybe my, waist or so, but it was terrifying.
Dude, Brandon, I mean, I have like a kind of like a baby experience version of what you're talking about, but like just to like illustrate like how like what you were doing, like how gnarly and scary that shit really is. Because what I was doing, like I really was in no danger because I was snowboarding. So like even if like I really could never have gotten myself back out, like they would have sent a ranger, would have came and got me. Like somebody would have come and got me eventually. People saw me and they saw what had happened. But I was snowboarding and just like, I don't even know how it happened, man. But I fucked up and like went like just flying, dude, into this snowbank that was so deep. And somehow the only parts of me that were so my head was above the snow so I could breathe. And the only other thing above the snow was just my feet and the snowboard and under the snow. And I was like immobile. And for some reason I couldn't because every time I tried to like maneuver or get out, I just got more stuck in the snow. And then I started to like panic, and I was like, and actually I think the panic is what finally got me out of the bank, because I literally started having like convulsions because I was like, because I thought it was almost like probably what people feel like when they go into quicksand. I know it's not nearly as deadly, but I was like, I can't die, And so, but it's that's just your amygdala, like that's like that ancient part of your brain. You're not in control of that situation. I was just in a snowbank, but like my amygdala was like, no, you're dead. You're going to die if you don't panic and have a complete meltdown and get out of this bank. So sorry to interrupt and go on that tangent, but I just want to say, like, I know the feeling of falling into deep snow, and it is scary, man. It's like it's claustrophobic.
It is very claustrophobic, and that kind of segues back into where I was going with that story, because I knew I was up on the top of this ridge, and I knew the trail was below me, and I post-holed my way all the way up this thing, because like throughout the entire trail, like I was really dedicated to staying on the trail as much as possible. But once it's completely covered in snow, like the high passes and stuff, usually you're just trying to find the safest way to get, vaguely towards where you're going. And so I knew the trail was below me, crested this ridge, and instead of, a slopey, snowy, downhill, it was just a straight rock cliff. And I've done quite a bit of climbing before. And so I either had to turn around and post-hole my way back all the way around this whole ridge, or go down the cliff. And I was 100% about going down that cliff. And so I down climbed this thing, and
no gear, like no way to like tie in or anything.
No.
So just free climbing down a cliff.
Yeah, of course. And which it was pretty cool. There were handholds everywhere, and it wasn't like super gnarly. It's like chunky rock instead of that smooth kind of like just have to use your fingers rock. And but at one point there was a chute, and so I was friction. I was holding both sides with my hands and my knees, and doing the slow wiggle down this vertical face. And that was fine. Like I've done that plenty of times before. The thing that I hadn't really anticipated was the fact that my backpack was a little bit wider than my body. So I got to a certain point and my backpack got caught and it hung up behind me. And so I was stuck, friction holding myself in the middle of this chute, and my backpack was completely locked in and I couldn't go anywhere. And I just, that hit my panic switch. And I was just like, I had probably like 10 or 15 seconds of just being like, everything is fucked and I'm going to die. And because it was still like, I was looking down at like a significant fall, like, at least 20 feet or whatever onto like rocks. And, but there was like a snowbank a little bit in front of that. And so I managed to unclip all of the harnesses on my, that were holding me into my backpack, because you have like a chest strap and like a waist belt. And then I was able to get it to twist under me, and then I just flung it out into the snowbank, which I had already like thrown my trekking poles down into from the top, and then I was able to turn around and then properly finish down climbing it. But yeah, that definitely, that was one of the ones where it takes a lot to get me to like do that absolute panic, but I was like, I'm gonna die. Yeah. Dude,
first of all, I want to say those are both scary ass moments, but I do like I vibe with what you're saying, man, with like, because like obviously, man, a predatory animal is terrifying and you're gonna be scared, but it is something weird, especially with people that do have like me, for instance. I don't know, maybe obviously you have it a little bit too, that claustrophobia, where there's something about like, if you're stuck in a crevice or maybe like stuck in a cave, something like that, that is the shit that there is a panic switch, because it's like your mind is like, just that's when you do lose that control of like, I master my fears, because your mind is like, you're trapped in a crevice
Yeah.
or, you know, like, like,
Yeah, I love adventure stuff. One thing that I have never done is spelunking, like, which I love caves. Like, I'll go like wander around a cave, but anything where it requires me to wiggle through a crack that I could get stuck in, like that would be like, I might do that at some point, but that would be like ultimate master your fear kind of stuff, because that creeps me out so much when you have to like deflate your chest in order to like go through a crevice. Like that's one of my like, whew.
I agree 100%, man. Spelunking is, and no offense to people that listen to this that do go spelunking, because obviously it's super cool. Caves are super cool, and honestly, I'm jealous that you can do that and it doesn't freak you out. But for me, like just like you said, I like to go walk around in a cave, like that's fun. But exactly, like for real spelunking, trying to like wiggle through tiny spaces to get into a tinier space and just going deeper and deeper. I have no desire to do it, man. It's like, I was like, I won't have any fun. I think I would just be bummed the entire time. I'll be able to think about is like, when do we get out of this cave? So
Yeah.
Hold up. It's time to check the mailbag. Every week on the show, we check the mailbag to see if anyone has written a message into the show, and then we read that message out loud. This week's message comes from Anderson. Anderson wrote, Welcome to the Illuminati Brotherhood World Organization. This is an open invitation for you to become part of the world's biggest conglomerate and reach the peak of your career by making you rich and famous in all you do. You may be a musician, politician, footballer, actor, actress, self-employed, student, etc. If you are interested in message me for more information, follow the light today and live your dreams. Well, if it is a Mercury retrograde, old Illuminati comes crawling back to my door. After Instagram says I'm not even good enough for a blue check mark, but I guess I'm good enough for the Illuminati. Thanks for running the show, Anderson. And now back to the interview.
I did want to ask this too, because like this kind of goes back to the question I asked you when you're like in the very, when you first started out, you were going through that adjustment phase, and like you were saying you're still dealing with a lot of like the TBI recovery, having to deal with breath work and just getting your body accustomed to like constant travel, all that stuff. But I imagine as time went by, you got more and more conditioned, and mentally and physically. So the question I have is: was there a specific point between Mexico and Canada where things clicked for you? That for you, where you were like, well, this is just normal life now, and things started to flow more naturally. Does that make sense? Where like you were like, this became your new normal.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I was there and not there for a significant part of the trail. It definitely, you fall into a rhythm, which is actually really kind of wonderful. People who come off of one of these trail experiences usually get depressed because you're back in modern life, which is like insane. And on the trail, everything is simple. Like you have your resupply, you have everything you need to continue surviving on your back. You're walking, hours and hours and hours every day. And there's a rhythm to it. You go to sleep with the sun, you wake back up, you continue hiking. It's really kind of like smooth and kind of carries you forward. And so you do develop that kind of rhythm where it is, this is your whole life now. And I don't know exactly when that clicked for me. It was probably pretty early. And that was awesome. On the other hand, it is miserable the entire time physically on various different levels. And so that kind of, it never felt easy. Like for me, for like pretty much the entire time, I'd have sporadic days that felt really good, but most of the time my legs and feet were completely dying in a new spot. And it kind of rotated around. Like first, my ankles were completely just shot in the beginning because you're always on a little bit of a tilt. The trail's always tilted a little bit one way or the other, which you're not prepared for normal life. So it went from my ankles, then the Achilles tendons blew up, the extensor tendons on the top of your foot, those blew up. I had crepsis, which was really weird, where you have a bunch of inflammation in the tendons to where when you move your toes, it creaks. It makes like an audible creaking sound that's like super
no,
crazy.
dude.
Yeah. And then I had it moved into the bottoms of my feet, like the plantar fascia got really messed up. And then in Oregon, I had shin splints. I had heard about kids having shin splints when I was in like, the runners and stuff when I was in middle school, all had shin splints. And I was like, didn't know what they were complaining about. Those are miserable. Like they are just absolute misery, especially because you're supposed to like stop moving in order to let them rest and recover. Yeah. And I couldn't do that.
You don't have that option.
So I was just walking.
You have to like tape your legs.
Yeah. So what I did was I had sock liners that I would wear. And so I sewed 2 sock liners together. So I had like a long strip of stretchy sock stuff. And then I just bound that around my leg, starting from a little bit above the ankle up onto my calf. And then tucked that into my hiking sock and my leg and kind of tied it all together and kept going. And that was my, it makes like a little compression to help protect the tendons as they're sliding. And then just kept hiking on it for the next 1,000 miles. So
yeah. Dude, oh, that sounds so painful. And I guess for anyone that doesn't know what shin splints, that's when your muscles start to separate from your shin bone, basically. So it is excruciating. And so obviously trying to continue hiking thousands of miles while your muscles are separating from your shin bone is like, that's a supreme act of will, man. That's pretty tight.
Yeah, I was pretty convinced. It got more, willy as I went along. The last section in Washington was just insane. There, I was completely trapped in the smoke. I had stayed ahead of the wildfires by about 2 weeks or so, for all the way up until when I got into Washington. And then some stuff happened that kept me off trail for about 2 weeks. And then I came back in and all the wildfires had caught up. And so
I didn't even realize timing wise, you would have been right there in the wildfires. So you would have been having to breathe that smoke while trying to maintain that pace.
Big 3,000, 4,000 foot climbs with a tripled over buff that I had wetted around my face. And I'm sure I probably came out with like black ass lungs. Like my lungs are probably like a smoker's lungs, or they were at least for a little while, but it was gnarly going through Washington. Like you're looking out over a cliff and your vision goes about 20 feet, like you can see like ghostly images of trees that are like literally 10 or 15 feet away from you.
Do you ever feel like there was almost points where you could have gotten asphyxiated from so much smoke?
Yeah, I mean, like there was always a degree of oxygen, because you're not trapped in a room, where like in a house fire, like the fire sucks all the oxygen out, and then you have all that smoke come in, and then there's literally no remaining air to breathe. There was enough oxygen, but at the same time, there was so much particulate, like raw particulate. This is the period where they were measuring like 1,200 AQIs in Portland and like stuff like that. That you're breathing in so much just actual particles of wildfire smoke that your throat burns. I had ash literally raining on my tent at night. That's like I'd wake up in the morning and there'd be like a caking of ash like on my tent. And yeah, so it was like super gnarly.
So it's basically like equivalent to like chain smoking, like filterless cigarettes while climbing a mountain at the same time for like weeks at a time, right? That's awful, dude.
Yeah, it was awful. Yeah, it was crazy. I definitely had some extreme intensity, especially in the later half of the journey. I had probably, I think my low point on the PCT, or at least the only point that I actually had the thought that like I kind of wished I could just go home, was in the middle of Oregon, and like Oregon was just it was nuts. I thought Oregon was going to be like a beautiful like oasis of trees and all green. That's like the image I have in my mind of Oregon, because I've spent a bunch of time on the Oregon coast. inland Oregon, especially Southern Oregon, is just a nightmare. It is a volcanic wasteland. It is super dry. California, you have a bunch of trail towns. So, every few days you're passing into a town that you could, if you're just exhausted, you can get a motel room and like spend the night, or there are grocery stores, stuff like that. There's none of that in Oregon. And after I came out of the Sierra, I really started having to pay attention to the amount of time that I had remaining. So, because you have a certain amount of miles per day, you have to make it to Canada. If you're going to stay ahead of the storms that just shut the North Cascades down, like as far as things that can end your trip, those big North Cascade blizzards, like eventually they cut people out. You just cannot finish because the weather gets so bad. So I knew I had to get up there by, early September, hopefully mid-September at the latest. And so there were a certain number of miles per day I had to hit in order to make that. And so going through Southern Oregon, I was at that point where I was like, I got to hit 20 miles like every day. And so I was grinding through these 20-mile days, did like 3 weeks of those, no trail towns, nowhere to rest, didn't take any zeros. I was just like grinding. The rocks and everything were just miserable, because anytime you're walking on like lava rocks that there's no dirt on the trail, it just tears your feet up. I was completely tired of the mosquitoes by that point. Like they just do not let up through that whole section. And there was this one morning I was by this lake called Brahman Lake, which I will never forget. Most of the lake names and stuff just blur together, but I was super frustrated. Like I was really uncomfortable. My shins had just exploded maybe like a week before that. So I was like in a ton of pain. I went out to go to the bathroom in the morning, and number two, like you got to take the pants down kind of bathroom. Yeah. Mosquitoes just swarmed all over my exposed everything. And like, yeah. I was like, I hate this so much. I have to get out of the wilderness right now. And so people on the PCT do a challenge where they try to stay awake for 24 hours and hike as far as they can. And I'd always kind of been interested in doing that, especially because I was, starting to recover, and I wanted to make a point of the fact that I was like not falling apart. And so anyway, so that was like, this is my time. I'm just going to like hike until I make it to Sisters, Oregon was the next upcoming town, which was 67 miles away. And I was like, I felt like I could probably do it in 24 hours if I pushed myself. A lot of the people that I knew were hitting about the 60-mile range. And I was like, I'm just going to make it. Like there is nothing that's going to stop me. And so anyway, so I start hiking, and I didn't know, but between me and Sisters, there were these huge lava fields of just absolutely awful, barren, horrible rock that just like tears your feet up. And so that turned into instead of 24 hours, it took me 32 hours of straight hiking without like stopping for like a nap or anything, just eating food and hiking 32 hours before I made it to Sisters. And then, and so that's intense, but this gets more intense. so I finally make it to Sisters, to the exit to get there. I sleep in my tent. By doing all of that work up front, I've carved myself out enough time for 2 zeros where I could just go into a hotel room, shut down, completely rest, then get back to my baseline, kind of recenter. And so I go into Sisters the next morning, get a hotel room, which was a little bit of a fiasco. Get into the hotel, made sure that I have a tub that I can soak in, because that was like my thing. Like if I had a like a bathtub and I could actually soak. And so I like draw a bath. I get into the bath, and then my phone rings, and it was my uncle, who I hadn't talked to in like 10 years, and I was like, oh crap. And so that's when he told me that my dad had just died, and who I hadn't seen for like quite a while. And so, and I'm an only child. I'm his only heir. That was like the moment that I had just started to unfold into relaxation, and said I have to spend the next 2 days, my 2 zeros, organizing to have, release of authorization for cremation, like trying to deal with all of the technical stuff that comes around with, dealing with somebody's death, and then planning how I'm going to get out of the middle of nowhere to like get over to Idaho where he lived in order to like settle his estate, and like, not to mention processing all of the intense feelings that go associated with that whole thing. Cause we weren't like super close. He was a really big influence on my life. He was also an alcoholic, and like, we hadn't been talking very much for a number of years, but that doesn't make it any less hard or complex when, you know, they pass or whatever. And so I just was, that whole section, I just got like pounded like over and over again. And then, so then I went from there, hiked 3 like 32-mile days to get up to my friend Sean's house in Oregon. He was really chill. He let me throw all my stuff there. I stayed with him for like a day or two, then rented a car, drove to Idaho, settled my dad's estate, you know, went through all of his stuff. That whole, you know, process, you know, it took me like a week and a half or 2 weeks, made it back to Oregon, and then resumed the trail with some of my dad's ashes, which I was going to take up to Mount Rainier. That was his namesake, his middle name. And as I'm trying to process having that whole loss and everything else, plus getting back on the trail, anytime you get off the trail, getting back on just is absolutely miserable. And so that first couple of days, especially when you loaded your pack down. So I had like a full pack. I put on probably 10 pounds of weight, which I needed anyway, but it just blows up all your joints and everything. So, and then that was the kind of like, there was a pall that hung over the last section, because that was Northern Oregon. So there was I had all this like crazy amount of like grief and like stress. And then that's when the fires moved past me while I was off trail trying to deal with all this stuff. So there was literally like a pall of smoke, like the entire atmosphere was clouded down and gray, which kind of reflected my whole like emotional turmoil and everything else. It was all very symbolic. It was kind of an interesting experience.
Yeah, man. Dude, that's one of the gnarliest fucking stories I've ever heard in my life. Oh, dude, I can't even imagine like the whole, like, especially after like, I mean, like taking yourself to that level of exhaustion, like, and then to like one of the most peak levels of like, you know, emotional, grief and all the other kind of feelings that come with these kind of things. And then having to like suddenly like you have these responsibilities. You have to be like, you've been in the wilderness. Now you're in a car. You're driving to fucking Idaho. Probably, I'm assuming like maybe some lawyers, because you're like, I guess you have to execute the will or whatever. Like, and then it's like you go back to a burned down forest. Oh my God, man. Yeah. Oh, dude. Well, shit, man. I hope you don't mind if I kind of turn the corner a little bit and ask. So since we kind of like, I was going to ask you about like maybe like, you know, some of the more miserable experiences. I know it can get so miserable out there, man. I didn't realize you were going to tell me something quite that gnarly, but I did want to ask this too as well, though, like, because you know I'm sure there were days like this, and I know it's one of the same kind of questions where I know like you must have had so many experiences, so it's silly for me to ask you to single out one day, but I was going to ask it that way anyway, and say that, can you single out a day on the trail where you felt like this is the greatest day? Like where you were out there and you were like, this is the reason I'm here. Like, this is the greatest day or whatever.
Yeah. Actually, I had a day in mind. It was actually coming up on Instagram. I'm like almost there, which was in the middle of the Sierra. I had kind of a dramatic parting from the group that I did. I did the highest passes with a little group, but we ended up splitting ways in Mammoth Lakes. So I did the last like major pass on my own, which was Donahue, where I was falling through the snow into the ice water and all that kind of stuff, which was pretty crazy. And I came down the other side and did Yosemite, and I was still ruminating quite a bit for a little while there. But anytime that I parted with a group, like it took me a couple of days to kind of regain my own rhythm, you know, when you're alone and everything else. But then that, you know, the Tai Chi in the middle of nowhere side comes out, where, you know, you're getting a little bit silly and wild, and like, it's actually pretty fun. Yeah. And so for me, there was a day, maybe like 3 days or so into Yosemite, where I felt really good. Like I had no weight in my pack. I guess this story actually takes a little bit of a preface story too, which was a story I wanted to tell anyway. But when I came down into Yosemite, there was a post office in Tuolumne Meadows. And so I was going post office to post office collecting my resupply packages, which had all my food in them. And I had a great friend, Shelby, who was helping to send me these packages. And so when I was prepping for the section, I was like, you have to call Yosemite's post office in Tuolumne Meadows and make sure that they're open because everything's super messed up right now. And she was like, okay, I got it. And so when she called, the dude picked up the phone and she was like, are you guys open? He's like, yeah, of course, we're always open. And so she was like, okay. And so she sent my resupply package there. But it turns out that Yosemite Valley Post Office and Tuolumne Meadows Post Office are like significantly far apart, but run in the same office by the same dude. And so he didn't know she was talking about the Tuolumne Meadows. Anyway, she sent my package to Tuolumne. There was nothing there. Like it was literally looked like a post-apocalyptic building. There was no roof. There were, weeds growing in the middle of it. My resupply box was supposed to be sitting like in the middle of this thing. There was nothing there. There weren't any stores. You couldn't buy food. There was like, literally, I was in this basin surrounded by mountains with nothing in it. I could have hiked, I think it would have been like 20 or 30 miles off trail to get to a town where I could resupply, but that would have cost me multiple days of travel off trail and everything. And so my other option, instead of like hiking out to try to get food, was to just press on to Sonora Pass, which was, I think it was about 4 days. I think it was like, it was close to 100 miles, like 80 something miles. And just not have any food during that section, which I could kind of manage because I had a Tenkara fishing pole, like a little 3.5 ounce fixed line fly fishing rod. And I was catching a ton of fish. Like I was feeding my whole group with fish just as a supplement. I think I was catching just a ridiculous number of fish during that period. And so I was like, I'll just stay really light, really fast. I'll catch a bunch of fish. I'll make it to Sonora Pass. And then I'll get completely resupplied. And so anyway, when your pack is super light, it feels like you're flying, because you're used to having 45 pounds in the Sierra. I had these crazy long stretches. Had like 45 or 50 pounds in my pack. I'm wearing an ultralight pack that rides well at like 25 pounds. So I'm super overweight. Anyway, during this period, my pack was down to its base weight of like 12 pounds. And then I was catching fish, in the evening and then kind of like floating through the days. I was pretty hungry, but I had one day in the middle of that was just beautiful. I had like virtually no weight on my back. Like I went back and forth between listening to music, but that particular day I was listening to some really good music, and I was thinking about a fiction story that I'd been wanting to write. And so I was falling into this creative zone while I was hiking with a good beat, and I was doing these really good climbs. If you're in the middle of a really good climb, it feels like amazing. The weather, it was just barely snowing. And that's like my perfect temperature for hiking because I get really hot. And so I was just kind of flowing through this beautiful day with all these like clouds and beautiful light, and my pack was light, and it was like wild adventure. I had no food. So I was like amped on the, adventure element to the whole thing. And I caught a fish with my bare hand that day.
Oh, hell yeah, dude. I think I saw the photo of that.
Yeah, it probably did. And I caught the biggest fish that I caught on trail. I caught like a 15-inch rainbow trout. I had some of the best fishing that night. I came down to this creek where it was actually, in Yosemite, you actually get some like wide kind of like, moderate moving water. Most of the rest of it's just like white coming down these like, straight mountains. But it was this beautiful creek that had broadened out to maybe like 30 or 40 feet. And I walked out onto this log. I was like really big, hefty log that was really stable. And I could see where all the trout were because you're sight fishing most of the time. And so I was casting and I was using underwater flies called nymphs. So I was casting out ahead of these trout, and I was just twitching my nymph down, trying to entice them. And I was sighted on this really big trout, and it just came up from the bottom and just smashed my line. And like it was an amazing experience. I caught 4 like beautiful trout that way. I was like splashing around in the water and like went and cooked them, and then like they were just tasted amazing, because nothing tastes better than when you have no food and you've been exercising for forever.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, but like that was like a feast, dude.
Yeah, like it was amazing. And anyway, that was my I had a crazy bear experience that night.
No way. What kind of bear was it?
Big brown bear. They are big black brown bear. I only saw crimson black bears that were completely brown the entire time that I was on the trail. So I saw lots of black bears, but they were never actually black, which was very confusing.
Those are like the more mellow bears, right?
They're smaller. It's ironic because grizzlies, the big ones, they'll mess you up. But it's usually more of like a territorial thing. They'll like knock you down, and then that's where you play dead, and like you're okay sometimes because they're like, yeah, you're not a threat anymore, and then they like wander off.
Yeah.
Black bears they don't really have that off switch. They're not like apex the same way that the grizzlies are. And so if you're going to get eaten by a bear, it's usually going to be a black bear.
Oh shit.
Yeah, but they are smaller, and they do tend to run away more. And sometimes they're not super small though. This particular night, I cooked those trout at the campfire, and which was amazing. But it was actually the first time that I had seen another person in like 4 days or something. There was some random guy in this campground. He was super non-social, and I saw him for like maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then he had already had his tent set up and everything. And I never saw him again after that. But I was trying to be like considerate because he was sleeping like for some reason he put his tent right next to the fire pit. And so I cooked my fish, and then I threw the bones into the fire. And usually I'd let them just like completely char out and then burn off. And but then that particular night I didn't want to leave the fire on super late because there was a dude sleeping right next to it. And so I doused the fire, because you have to be like super fire cautious. So I like really heavily doused it. But when you douse a campfire, it takes a little while for all that moisture to kind of evaporate off in that remaining residual heat, even after all the fire's out. So usually a couple hours after you like fully put the campfire out, once all the water dries out, you get this burst of campfire aroma. It's really kind of like a nice smell, but that'll come like, in the middle of the night or whatever. And for me, that particular night, because I put it out a little earlier than normal, I woke up at about midnight, and that burst of smell was 100% cooked trout. Like it was just like, it was like a trout bomb. Like it smelled great, but I woke up at like 12:30 and I was like, that is going to call every bear in like
a bear could probably smell that from like 100 miles away, right?
Seriously. And I'd seen bear scat earlier that day. And so I was like, well, this is going to be interesting, and kind of like rolled back over and went back to sleep. And then maybe like half an hour later, I woke up as this large branch just snapped, like you can just hear that immediately.
Yeah.
And this bear just like walks through the camp. I'm like peering under the edge of my tent, like looking in the moonlight. And you just get this big shape, and you can hear it just like crunching through all of this brush, and it goes right up to the campfire and kind of like stirs it around a little bit. That dude must have been losing his mind. That bear was like 2 feet away from him. and then the bear kind of like roots around for a minute, and then he just like, takes off. And but anyway,
bears are so cool, man.
Bears are so cool. I had a ton of bear experiences where they come in at night, but I saw bears maybe 4 times on the trail, and they're always super cool. Like
I've only had one bear encounter, like where I actually like came face to face with a bear. My whole life, man, just one.
Yeah.
But it was tight. I was like, oh damn, this bear is so cool. I hope it doesn't kill me.
Yeah, and they're so big that like you're really just kind of hoping most of the time. You can like quasi fight off a black bear if they're like small, but especially the bigger ones, like they're just gonna eat you. They're huge. They'll do what they want with you. And then grizzlies are in like a whole other like realm. That's why you play dead with them. But yeah,
it was probably the worst animal to get eaten by, almost certainly.
Yeah, black bears are like no joke too.
Because at least a mountain lion's gonna like it'll kill you first
Yeah,
and then eat you.
yeah.
But like bears
Yeah.
are just like
Yeah, I read an article talking about a woman in Europe that placed a phone call while being eaten by a black bear, and it was like
holy
gnarly.
shit.
Like, yeah, like she called her mom and was like, "Mom, it's eating me." It was terrible, which is really like I hate repeating those kind of stories because they're really interesting, but also is the complete opposite of, like people are way too afraid of bears and cats. Like, like there's a sense that, you're out in the middle of the wilderness, they're just going to come eat you because you're prey, but they don't want anything to do with you like 99% of the time. Every bear that I saw on trail immediately turned around and ran away at an astonishing rate. But they just like take off. And I was really sad because I wanted to get a good photo of one because like I was taking photos through this whole trip. Yeah. And I really wanted a photo of one, but every time I saw them, we'd always end up sneaking up on each other because if they hear you, they're going to like skedaddle and you'll never see them. Like one example, I was coming around a bend in the trail that was coming up and around, and there was a creek right there. And so the creek like burbling along was masking the sound of me walking. And so I come up around this corner on this creek, and there are two cinnamon black bears sitting there looking at me. And we were probably 10 to 15 feet apart, scared the hell out of each other. They turned and just booked it downhill. I'm like, I had a moment where like it's really weird to kind of record your first reaction in those moments. For me, I was like, those are way too small to be grizzlies. And then I was like, shit, where's my camera? And then by the time I completed both of those thoughts, they were hightailing it away at like 30 miles an hour into the down this gorge into the forest. And then I spent the entire rest of that day with my camera out recording, like trying to see if I'd stumble in on them again. But yeah, bears are like really chill most of the time, and people are like way more afraid of them than they need to be. But if you mess with them or they get habituated to humans or they're starving or something, they will eat your ass. So yeah.
I can't remember the name of the documentary. I'm sure you might have seen it too. It's called I think it was called like The Grizzly Man. Do you know what I'm talking about? He was the dude that went. He lived with grizzly bears. Like he lived in their cave with them for like 8 years. Like. And they just never ate him because, like, I guess, like, just I don't know what. So he, like, literally in his mind, he thought he became a grizzly bear. And then there's like the final year he went to go stay with him, and like his camera was on, but you couldn't see him, but the audio was on, and so you could hear him being eaten for like 30 minutes because they don't bite your jugular. They don't give a shit. They're like almost like raccoons, like. Oh man. Brandon, I got to say this, dude. It is time for the lightning round. You're familiar with the lightning round, right?
Yeah.
All right. But just in case, I got to reacquaint you with the rules. The lightning round is, so unlike all the other questions I've asked you where, it's important to be thoughtful and to kind of think about your answer, the lightning round is nothing like that. I'm going to ask you a question as fast as I can, and it's gut reaction, and you just got to answer as fast as you can. Some of them will be easy. Some of them will just be questions that that are just kind of like logistical stuff that you already know. But some are just gonna be like, don't think, and whatever first comes to your mind, that's the true answer. Okay.
All right.
We'll start off with a pretty easy one because I know you know the answer to this, and I'm just very curious. I just want to know how many days worth of water can you carry? Like from a start point.
As many as you can carry, honestly. It's like 2.2 pounds per liter. So I kept a capacity of 7 liters when I was in the desert. I only actually filled that up once, which was doing the LA aqueduct. You go through this huge dry stretch where it's just miserable hot and there's no water for like, I think it's like 20 miles, a little bit less. And so during that period, and you need like 4 miles to a liter probably. And at least more.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so it's as much as you can possibly carry. I usually had about 2 or so when there were streams coming up. You're looking down the trail on the map at where all of the water sources are. So you get super keyed into where the water is, and then you carry only as much as it will take you to get to the next water because it is the majority of your weight a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's the heaviest thing on you. Yeah, for sure. So like you'd say like 7 liters is like a pretty hefty load.
Oh God, yeah, it weighs like a
Yeah.
ton.
All right, cool, man. Now you definitely already told us a story about when you were not able to access your resupply, but you were also in an area where there was a lot of like fishing. You were getting really lucky, catching a lot of fish, and so you were able to get through there and eat. But obviously, that wasn't a planned thing. But I did have a question. Do you ever intentionally rely on being able to supplement your food supplies while you're in the wilderness, or do you never rely on that unless it's just
No, I did a bunch of reading about this too beforehand, but yeah, no, like on these kind of trips, like you want to have your calories as much as you can, like dialed in ahead of time. And then anything that you can catch, I totally all about foraging and catching stuff, but that is always a supplement. Because it takes so much longer to do the hunter gatherer thing than people think. And if you're hiking 12 hours a day, there's like not enough time for that if you're going to make any sort of distance on the trail. So yeah, you want to keep as much food with you as possible. That was probably one of the hardest things for me on the trail was I was constantly just bleeding weight. Like I was burning like 6,500 calories a day probably. I lost 40 or 50 pounds over the course of the trail. Like
holy shit?
Yeah. I started at like 193 probably. And
damn, so you were like emaciated at the end of this thing.
Oh, dude, I had no body fat. I got down to like low single digit body fat where I was eating as much as I humanly could. Anytime I was in trail, just gorging, or anytime I was in town, just absolutely gorging. And then I could only carry and like eat maybe 3,500 calories of trail food with me. I was carrying bottles of oil, like literally like a bottle of olive oil and a bottle of coconut oil. And I would sip on them throughout the day just to get calories because it's the most calories per, density per amount of weight that you can have.
Oh, that's super smart. I never even thought about doing something like that.
Yeah, it helped quite a bit, but I got super depleted to the point where I was actually like peeing blood at one point in Northern California, where like my body was like just like failing on me, and I had to like really be like I need to like force in as much calories and food as possible, and like really kind of get things like back under control.
That's
but
crazy.
Yeah, but
I never even thought about that aspect of a trip that long that you would like.
That you could
lose that much weight.
Yeah, like it was really funny because when I was pretty early on the trail, one of the guys that I met was like, "Man, this is such like an awesome experience. Like, how many years do you think this is going to add to our lives, having done all this awesome activity?" I was like, "Dude, this is going to be so hard on you. Like this, by the end of the trail, like this is you're slowly dying as you're going along. Like you are pushing your body so far beyond its limits that it is literally breaking itself down by the end of it." And so yeah, no, it was hard, but yeah, keep your food lined out. Like anything you can catch is like a bonus, and you need the bonus, but don't count on the bonus.
All right, like now let me ask you a really serious question.
All right.
Which Lord of the Rings character do you most identify with, and why?
Oh God. That is a hard question. I don't know. I'm gonna say Sam because I liked him the most, and he was like friendly and cool.
Yeah, Sam was a good dude for sure. I wasn't expecting you to say Sam though at all.
No, I know. That's weird too. Like people talk about like with Harry Potter, they're like sorting themselves into houses and stuff, and like I totally internally feel like a Hufflepuff, and like most people are like, dude, you act like a Gryffindor or whatever, but inside I feel like a Sam. So yeah, so I don't know.
That's a great answer, man. I just for some reason I thought you would say Aragorn because he spent like the first 100 years of his life
wandering around. I know.
Hiking Middle Earth, dude.
Well, this is the lightning round, and you gotta say
but that's awesome, man, because you went straight to like, well, no, but like genuinely as a person, Sam. That's fucking cool, man. All right. This is a good question. I'm glad I wrote this. What are you more interested in? Ocean exploration or space exploration?
Personally, I am a science fiction author that really likes space a lot. I think the ocean has more than enough exploration for us available on Earth, and like there's a ton of awesome stuff in there. I'd love to do some like deep sea explorations and stuff like that. really cool. I would love to go to outer space though. Like if I had to choose between the two, I'd go explore another planet.
I was gonna ask you what genre of fiction you write. You write sci-fi? That's fucking awesome, dude. That's my favorite genre.
Yeah. I write pretty much all over the board. A lot of the time.
I wasn't trying to pigeonhole you, man.
Yeah. No, speculative fiction, like that umbrella is pretty much my home. So science fiction, fantasy, horror, all that kind of stuff. I've written a decent amount of fiction. I wrote a romance novel because I was really trying to get published.
Oh, tight, dude.
That was an interesting experience. But yeah, science fiction is probably my home within the genres.
Yeah, dude. It's there's a quote by Kurt Vonnegut that I really liked about that. Because obviously Kurt Vonnegut was a very, he's like, in my opinion, like the great American author, but he got put in the drawer with other science fiction, with science fiction, and he said he couldn't be happier being put in any other drawer than in the science fiction drawer. And yeah. I appreciate that. I like that quote by him, man.
Yeah.
Oh, this is actually this is kind of cool because we were just talking about this, man. When you said you would when you got to town, so you had to pack the calories to keep from turning into that dude from Thinner, that Stephen King movie. So what is your most highly recommended restaurant that a person who is taking the Pacific Crest Trail could access?
Oh, that's hard. It's all kind of conditioned based on where you are too. I could tell you probably one of the favorite meals that I had. Trying to remember the name of it. It was like this tiny little resort in Oregon where you come off trail to resupply. And I'm having a hard time remembering the name, but I like I said, I ate as much food as humanly possible, and I was on a budget. Like I was trying to keep the cost down as much as I could. Anyway, I went into this one little tiny resort, and they served hamburgers. And I like my hamburgers like super rare, like very, very rare. And cooks will accommodate that more or less. But there was this one little shop, and it was like in the middle of this random resort where they were serving these giant hamburgers. They advertised them as being like half-pound patties, but they were definitely more like eclipsing the bun. And I got him to give me 2 patties, and like ultra rare, and he only charged me like $1.50 for the extra patty. And so I sat there with like a pound and a quarter of hamburger and just like mowed it. It was amazing. But some of those little tiny resorts that are just like scattered along this trail, they'll have some excellent food. You can find some pretty awesome stuff all throughout. And then of course everybody knows about like the Pie and Julian, which is pretty early. That was a pretty good restaurant that was worth to go into too.
Tight, man. I guess does that ever kind of bother you, after you've been when you get off the trail and you go eat like really rich food and then you got to go hike again? Does that ever suck? Or do you just feel like you got lead in your stomach or?
Oh, hell yeah. Like I was saying, when you get off trail and go into town, the first day or so after you get back on trail, it's just absolute misery. You're heavy. I'd have like 10 pounds of food inside of my gut, and then a full resupply on my back. And your body spends so much energy on trying to digest stuff that you're just you're dragging. Yeah. And so it takes like a day of eating the food you're carrying and digesting everything that you just gorged on in town before you kind of fall back into the rhythm again. So definitely.
But humans are we're so different than all of our animal friends out there, because animals they'll put all that energy into getting their meal, but then once they've eaten like a lion, once a lion's had their meal, they just lay back, they don't go for a walk. All right, man, here's another movie question, dude, but it's also but it's a true story. It's Revenant. Do you think that when the Revenant had a hike across all South Dakota after getting mauled by a bear, do you think that was pretty tough, or is that just more Hollywood propaganda?
Well, I mean, kind of depends on how it actually looked in real life. I can tell you, being injured and hiking is a nightmare, and if you can do it, it's pretty tough. You've got it. And the human body and will is capable of a tremendous amount when push comes to shove. You can that was one of the things that I really learned on the trail. That was a really valuable lesson was people kind of run around with a very diminished view of what their body is actually capable of. People, they feel in their day-to-day life like they're pushing their limits, like even like working out or going on a little run or whatever. That's all my body can possibly do. But no, dude, like you can throw your body into some extreme stuff, like this hike. Like I was like injured, had no food. I just was like, you are gonna keep hiking, and my body was like, okay, and just kind of like kept the legs moving for another 1,000 miles or whatever. So some of that kind of extreme stuff is definitely possible. Whether Hollywood like hyped that whole situation up, that's another thing entirely. But yeah, it's interesting. The people can do a lot when they're really motivated.
It was a tight ass movie. It was a cool story too. Yeah. Is that I don't know. I mean, you probably don't know if it's off the top of your head, but I know that like there was that time period where Leonardo DiCaprio had made like 1 billion movies, but he'd never gotten an award. And so maybe I think that might have been the movie where they were finally like, give him an Oscar, dude. He did The Revenant. Because it was like, because I think everyone was like, oh, Wolf of Wall Street, like that, he'll get it for that. And then Matthew McConaughey just like swooped in and was like, nope.
Yeah, no, they're like, okay, let's make this as much like torture porn. You have to give it to him. This clearly was miserable. Poor guy. He looked like he was through the ringer from that. So yeah, and yeah, he went forever without getting an Oscar.
I know, man. And I mean, he made some pretty great movies. Did you ever see The Basketball Diaries?
Maybe a long time ago.
It's like he was super young. Mark Wahlberg's in it too, and he's like a teenager. It's like,
oh wow,
crazy early on, but it's like it's also a true story. I don't know. I recommend it, man. It's a little depressing. All right, moving on to the next question. All right. You know how sometimes when sailors have been at sea for way too long, they start seeing like mermaids and shit? Do you think people ever hike for too long and then they'll be like looking at a cactus and just be like, yo, that cactus looks fine? Like, do you think that ever happens to people?
Oh yeah, no, dude. Like, kind of referencing back to your Tai Chi moment again. Like, you get really silly after you're alone for like 3 days or so. Your brain's trying to entertain itself. There's a phenomenon, I believe it's pareidolia or whatever, where you start seeing shapes and faces in like random everyday things like trees and stuff. I got that to like the extreme at various points on the trail where everything looked like a face or like a weird animal, or fortunately I didn't end up humping any cactuses, but but yeah, there were some really like random things, and I was seeing faces everywhere, and that's totally your brain's pattern recognition and like the deprived social element just being like, let me try to find something else that's in the environment that I can like pretend as another human.
Yeah, dude. Brandon, also the most important question obviously of this entire interview, man, is like where can people like find you, check out your work, and like obviously we've been talking about how you're doing a photography series of this that people can check on Instagram, but also something I'm very curious is that I know you have some fiction work that you've written that's going to be coming out soon, and I'd love to know how I can keep up with that and how I can read that, how I can find that.
Yeah. So as far as like online presence, I'm pretty much on Instagram right now. Like I'm building that up. Yeah, people can get to me through there. It's at Brandon Case 101, and then I think you'll have links to it. As far as like the fiction and stuff, I'll be posting links when it starts coming out. I'm doing a really awesome project called Los Suelos, which is a fictional town in California. It's super cool. Can't really get into too much about what it is, but at this point, because it's still pretty early in development. But I'm working with editors to come up with a really interesting story. So that was like a really cool one. I'll be published in a small Drabble market called Martian Magazine in December 13th, I think. And so that's Drabble. They're 100-word stories where it has to be exactly 100 words and still.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that, dude. I've heard about those. Yeah. Cool.
So I have Drabble coming out in Martian Magazine in December, and it's the science fiction Martian Magazine, not the racist one. It's unfortunate that I have to clarify that anytime I talk to people.
Oh shit, that sucks. There's another one that's a racist. Fucking, I hate those guys, man.
And
they always find a way to ruin everything. Sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, so it's the science fiction one, so those are the two main projects that I have coming out later in this year that I'm like super amped about. And then got a bunch of stuff on Instagram, and I'll kind of I really have needed to develop an online presence, which I've been avoiding doing for many years. So I'm starting with Instagram, and then I'll kind of like branch out. But if you head there, you can get a hold of me, and I'll throw up links when I put new work out.
Word. And also, anyone listening, like if you follow me on any of my socials, obviously I will be continuing to follow Brandon. So whenever he puts something else out new, I will make sure that link is accessible through me. If you just for any reason, like, if that's just how it goes. I don't know if you're like ever going to make a Twitter or whatever, or a website, but we'll see how it goes. But Brandon, man, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. It was a super pleasure, man. Thank you so much, dude.